So mood boards, it's a combination of colors, fonts, sometimes design elements that are put together to kind of show how certain looks and feels come together. And then we go all the way to putting actual layouts together with those elements. So you kind of have the pieces all separated and then how they all work together.
Yeah.
And it gives a client a view of those elemental pieces and then how it all comes together. And then they can kind of see how the brand has evolved from this first part all the way to something that becomes almost a living visual.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Marketing Blender Show. I am Dacia Coffey, and my special co-host today is Colin Short, the creative director of the Marketing Blender. Now, I am so excited to introduce you guys to Colin because we're going to pull back that curtain of creativity and you get to actually hear the method behind the truly brilliant madness that comes out of this man's brain. So thank you so much for hopping on the show. I know you prefer to be behind your painting and graphic design tools,
Yeah.
but I really appreciate it. I'm so excited to help people hear what goes into the branding process and that visual communication.
Oh, you're very welcome. I am more comfortable behind the camera, but for today, sure, no worries.
So why don't we just start with basics? So obviously you're a creative director, but talk to everybody about, okay, like right when you got out of school, have you always loved to design or draw? And just a little bit about your career path and, you know, what led you here.
Yeah, I feel like I've always been a creative at heart. You know, I started drawing. I actually started drawing, copying my brother, who was also a bit of an artist, and then just kind of fell into doing more of that art. A lot of times it was book covers in high school. Which
Cool,
just
yeah.
Turned into, I wasn't even part of the journalism team, but I just kind of went over there all the time and started drawing things on for the annuals, and then chose that path into college, and it seemed like a natural choice for me. So I've always been a natural at drawing and being a creative in those ways. So,
Okay, what was your first job out of college?
My first job out of college was actually at a t-shirt company.
Nice.
Yeah, I was there for only about 6 months. I just had my first child, and it was right out of college. So, quick t-shirt design place. But that's come in handy with clients in the future and knowing how that process works. So every once in a while. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So then where did you end up going from there?
So my first, what I would call my real job I moved to Dallas and got a job with Fitz and Floyd as an art director. So that's a career choice that kind of drove me into the branding side of things, understanding brands and sub-brands. And then also I did a lot of art direction for photography. So that was a really helpful skill set. Yeah.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So, you know, when you started going into branding, you know, let's start with a basic, like from a person where creativity and just visual communication is so second nature to you. Like, what does brand represent to you from a creative director standpoint?
Brand is really for an organization's visual side, for their marketing. It's really everything. Their logo is sort of the cornerstone of that, and then everything should really build off of that. You know, there should be that cohesiveness between that brand identity, and then you can look at so many different avenues and aspects of a company's business, whether it's their marketing, whether it's their interior design, whether it's their messaging, how their salespeople speak to their clients. Branding can really go in so many different directions.
Yeah, it's so funny that you just mentioned that because I was talking to a woman who was about to own a new yoga studio. I might have told you about this. And I was asking her about the customer experience, what it was going to feel like when people walked in. And she never thought about that as part of her brand.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, you know, and I mean, but it is funny. That's why I asked that question, because there's so many aspects to branding that I think we take for granted being around it. all the time?
When I think of branding, I think of imprints. That's sort of the first thing that comes to mind is whenever you can create that consistency that creates imprints in someone's brain that reminds them of a brand. And the more you do that, you're just building that brand even bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
So
okay,
yeah.
so where do you start? Because it's one thing to say, okay, we start with the logo, but
Yeah.
logos are very, very difficult. So from a process standpoint, where do you personally start to really, start to get that truth of an organization and what it needs to turn into visually?
A lot of times, if I'm coming into an organization that either has a logo or is looking at rebranding, for me, it's kind of key to talk to employees. You start to get a feel for who the organization is.
Yeah.
Whether it's from the top down or the bottom up. You start to get some insight for, what the company's about, what the organization is, who their clients are. And then you try to put all that together and try to pull little bits of information that you can then start to build visuals. And to me, that's where your brand should come from, because it comes from a place of truth.
Yeah. Okay, so what kind of questions would you ask employees?
Yeah, it's really kind of an organic process. It's different every time. You try to get to know someone briefly and then just ask them some general questions about the organization. And you'll be surprised how much information you can get from just that.
Yeah.
It's really not any kind of predetermined questions, because like I said, every organization is different. So
yeah, it's a great point. It's kind of like when you walk down the hall of an organization, you can feel the type of energy
Absolutely.
and the type of personality sometimes, and especially since we get the benefit of working with so many different types of clients. Like you really do go, oh, I can already feel the heartbeat here. It's different than what I've experienced before, even if it's in the same market.
Absolutely.
Okay, so how often is it where people bring you, I want this color, or have these design examples, and is that helpful to you or not helpful to you?
It is sometimes. I think one of the most important things that a client could maybe know about any design process is trust. They're coming to us for a reason.
Yeah.
And when a client gives over that trust, it's so much easier. I mean, the trust goes both ways.
Yep.
But it's so much easier then to be free to take all the information that you're gathering from them and then put it together. It's okay to have some input from them. Definitely. You definitely want that. And part of that process that you go through is you get some of that information. But there's been times where, I've had clients that just want to give you all the information, and it ends up leading to a place that's not where they really should get to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does, because I think when you're so close to it, like your own brand, you think you're thinking about, okay, what do I like? But it's not that. It's about how is your company going to be perceived and what aligns with the truth of what's already there. And it is very difficult to get outside of yourself, get outside of your organization, and start saying, oh, yellow actually makes sense for us because we are a happy or lighthearted company. Like you oftentimes just can't see just that fundamental everyday truth of who you are and what people already perceive. But an external creative person could come in and listen, walk the halls and look around and start formulating that visual structure.
They're really missing out on the opportunity to get to explore what they may not have thought of. Yeah. And that amazing idea that only comes through some of those processes. And the thing is, the client can always say no.
Yeah.
So we're never saying no to a client. But by going through the process of allowing us to do what we do best allows them to get the best of us.
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously we work with tons, mostly privately held companies or founder-led companies. And so it's interesting because you love to spend time with that main person, that founder, and just kind of have an organic conversation.
Absolutely.
I remember one time I walked in on one and you were like asking them about the design of their home. And I was like, So interesting. I was like, okay, I'm such a words person. I'm like, nope, I'm not going to add any value. I'm out of here.
Well, it's so important for me to find out, like I said before, what employees think and what customers think. But at the end of the day, you also have to remember that the client has to live with what you produce
Yeah.
when you're done.
Yeah.
And so it has to, let me re-say that. So it really has to feel like it's theirs
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So another thing is, the internal confidence that comes from rebranding or just a new brand can be amazing. It can put smiles on employees' faces, and it can level up the confidence of sales.
Agreed. Makes you so proud of where you work for
Absolutely.
when it
Yeah.
really represents you well. I completely.
And by having
completely
those
agree.
conversations with the founders and then getting what's true from their souls,
Yeah.
is it ends up in the brand as well. At least that's your hope.
Yeah.
And when that happens, anything can happen.
Okay, so one thing that I don't think people realize is describe what mood boards are for people.
So mood boards, it's a combination of colors, fonts, sometimes design elements that are put together to kind of show how certain looks and feels come together. And then we go all the way to putting actual layouts together with those elements. So you kind of have the pieces all separated and then how they all work together.
Yeah.
And it gives a client a view of those elemental pieces and then how it all comes together. And then they can kind of see how the brand has evolved from this first part all the way to something that becomes almost a living visual,
I love them because you get to experience the process and the direction that it's heading
Yeah.
versus waiting for this big reveal and going, oh God, am I going to love it? Am I going to hate it? You know what I mean? Like where you can start to go, oh my gosh. And it's fun to see that aha moment in clients'
Yeah.
minds where they don't realize like the very specific font,
Right.
the angle
Yeah.
of the photography or different type of, how the different colors work together or the style of something and those elements where people are like, oh, okay, where they can start seeing it come together. I think it's such a very fun approach. Do you always use mood boards or when do you find them most helpful?
I developed a technique of building decks, not just one mood board by itself. I like to show the process of how you get from maybe one element that's in their industry, and then maybe another element, and then kind of show it with a visual that connects them to the element. So they are then seeing those elements that you're going to eventually put together, maybe as their logo or design elements. They are seeing that in context to things that they know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you do that, there's that correlation with, something they know they're very familiar with, and then when you put it together with the brand, it's sort of an immediate buy-in, and yeah, it's very powerful.
The decks that you build, that reveal process is very emotional. I mean, even me watching it, and
Yeah.
these are our clients, not my company, right? And just watching the elements and just that clear, beautiful representation that's
Yeah.
familiar to them. Like you mentioned, you love finding something that's already in their existing
Yeah.
environment and using those to build
Sure.
one upon another. They're so fantastic.
Well, it's all based on research. You really do have to do the work, go into an organization, understand what they do. And it's also letting them know that, okay, I've taken the time to understand what they do, put that in a visual on a mood board or a mood deck, and put in a process that helps them understand where we're going with that journey. And it's really an exciting process. You talked about when the client finally sees that finished product, or they start working with it, they start living in it. It's really cool to see that client then kind of jumping on board and it's an oh yeah moment.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
You know what? We should share some with the audience, I guess,
Yeah.
part of that. If we're going to talk about visuals, that we actually visualize them for you. So we went ahead and grabbed our laptop so Colin can actually walk through the process that he was explaining. So where do you want to start? I'm so excited to do this for the audience because I think this is so fun.
Well, this first one is one of our clients, one of our favorite clients, New Life CFO. And this is an interesting one because, we were going to go through the process of building a new website for them. And I knew that there was going to be some great opportunity to build upon their brand.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about this one is that the client actually asked us not to change their
Do
logo.
not touch
Says
the
there,
logo.
Do not touch the logo.
Exactly.
Which I immediately ignored.
Because you're advocating for what's best and you're just going to explore.
And it was really just some subtle adjustments
Yeah.
that needed to happen, just so we could be cohesive with the changes that we were going to, well, not changes, but just so we could be cohesive with the additions that we were adding to their brand.
Yeah.
And it made sense. And for this one, we've got a before and after here. We updated their font, and we added a curve.
Okay, talk about the curve because this was a game changer. And so immediately, like when I'm looking at this as a non-creative director, non-visual, I'm a writer, what you notice immediately is it's softer.
Yes.
Without losing the strength. So it's slightly more modern, which is so on point for this client because they are very forward thinking, like they're very proactive. And so I thought like what you did with this, like abandoning that overly classic font and moving into something more modern, but also softer was such a better reflection of how sharp they are in
Right.
addition to how heart-centered and heart-forward they are.
Well, when you look at the logo, you can see that we didn't change much, but we did change the font. We went to a sans serif instead of the serif font. It's an updated, a little bit more contemporary. One of the things that the feedback we got from the client is they really liked mid-century modern. So that plays to the clean lines of the text as well as the curve. And so, yeah, those together, even though they're subtle changes, it made a real big impact for this brand.
I love it.
And as you can see, we didn't change. The leaf is there, the color is the same, but I think the balance works a lot better. Those serifs in the other font tend to be distracting to the eye to me.
Yeah.
And you've already got the organic shapes in the leaf, so we wanted to juxtapose that with the straight lines and the clean lines of the font.
I love it. I
So,
love it.
yeah.
All right. So take us into some of the additional style elements that you used. And I love to refer this to this as a brand evolution instead of a brand revolution, which is really what you did.
Absolutely. So with that curve, it allowed us to put it into some design elements, just some little areas that would hold text, some graphics for headers for their website.
Yep.
Whether it's on a deck, introducing sections, pretty much any kind of element. We can take this look and feel, by having these curves and these other elements, and then adding those curves to illustrations and things like that. Now all their marketing materials have a very clear identifier.
Yes.
That is within all elements.
Yeah.
So it really brings everything that they do, brings consistency.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, another thing that you did is you introduced a few additional colors. So as you pointed out in the logo, of course, you maintain their core brand
Right.
color. So why? When you're thinking color theory, and visual balance, like, what led you to this? Because we'll show the audience how it all comes together in just a minute.
Well, you always want to have your primary colors, and you want to try to stick with those whenever you can. But when designing, there's always a need to have some additional color to help, sometimes to help balance your main colors. Sometimes it's to help those colors pop more.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a complementary, and that's why we call them complementary or secondary colors. In this case, that lighter green, it helps us to keep that green color scope, but then allow us to, what's the right word? Help create layers sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, when you've got a color that's just off. In this case, that worked really well. The gray is just a nice complementary color to the green.
Yep.
It's also a dark enough color for fonts, and it's a heavy color, so it weights really well.
Yes.
So when you're creating balance on a page, those things are important. And the blue came about, we wanted something that was just a good separation, but still worked with those colors. And when I was talking to the client, they actually mentioned that they had a blue. And so we brought back a blue that complemented their green.
I love it.
So it just helps. The other nice thing about having some colors is it allows you to look for things like in photography. If you want to have a nice photography that complements the brand, sometimes having some colors that are in your brand is a nice way to represent those brand colors without having to pull in additional elements.
And it's such a great point because these are not things that people consciously recognize, but that they subconsciously perceive as prestigious and pulled together and just extremely professional, as in they did not just come up about, yesterday. So, well, let's take a look over at the website, because then you started layering in that some natural elements in the website. So after you had those basic design, now we start to see some of the background that you used in the website that really just brought everything to life.
Absolutely. Another part of this process is not forgetting the original brand. And while we added that curve, one of the key components is that little leaf that's in there.
Yes.
And that little leaf to them is an idea of growth.
Yep.
And then when they take that journey, when one of their clients takes the journey of what the organization does for them, it's growth. It's about growth. So we introduce some, as you see here, you see the curve, but you see some texture. So we used paper, wood, all of the things that leaf grows into a forest, and that forest creates trees. So it's a subtle element, but if you think about it, growth, one of the things in growth is money. Money's made from paper.
Yep.
Paper comes from trees. It's also the journey, the idea of coming from a small plant to this big forest. We're thinking about it from a standpoint, not only just the visuals, the elements, but also the visual photography that takes a viewer on that journey with the client.
Yeah, and their photography was just beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful. So everything will be linked, of course, in the show notes, so people can get some inspiration from this. And I think the final thing about it is that when they're talking about that new life and growth, it's also new life and inspiration, a relief from burden and from problems that their clients are faced by. And so what I loved is there's some softness and confidence here that absolutely mirrors their really heart-forward delivery of cleaning people's finances up and helping to take them into a more prosperous type of growth. And it's just very exciting. So, okay, so let's jump into, I think you've got two other examples for us here. So who's up next?
So another example we've got here is Tyler Building Systems. This was actually a little bit of a tough one at first because they didn't have a lot to go on from a standpoint of their initial brand, and we weren't changing that. We were using their existing brand.
Right.
And it's kind of a unique icon. It's part of their structure system that they work with.
Yeah, the metal buildings.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, but the shape is not conducive necessarily to the first thoughts you might come to when you're building brands. So yeah, had to play with that a fair bit, and then finally came up with just taking the shape and breaking it up, that sort of arched, what would I call it?
Yeah, that roof line.
That
is
roof
basically
line,
what
yeah,
you're
that's
pulling
really
off
what
of.
it is. Yeah, exactly. Breaking that up and turning that into a shape that's almost a a frame for sections
Yep.
of a website, because that's basically what we were doing, is rebuilding their website.
Yes.
And then the next part that we did was I looked through a lot of their what would you call it? Their floor plans. Or not their floor plans, their building plans.
Yeah, like the blueprints.
Their blueprints.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then started getting shapes from that. And so really it was basically looking at those structures, and that was the starting point to build what we see here with different elements for the organization.
Yeah, exactly.
Their
for
branding.
for their brand, their new brand or updated brand.
So we had a little element that went on the photography for like a frame, their learn more buttons, and then we took those color schemes and we started building icons, and then the next step was to look at their materials, started their metal buildings. So started looking at backgrounds, metal building backgrounds, looking at lines, looking at texture. And then putting all that together and coming up with a page layout.
I love it. And then, the page layout, like where you see that roof line brought in, and it just complements how the font's laid out. I mean, I thought it was so clever when everything really just started coming together. And again, just communicates that professionalism and their depth of expertise and how long they've been doing this by pulling in all of those elements.
Another thing we had to do, they had some great photography, so we didn't have to do much there, but we wanted to bring in that human element.
Yeah.
So we devised a way to kind of not superimpose people in front of, like we were trying to make them fit like they were in the photo, but place them on top, and it brings that human touch to the site. So that was a nice touch there as well.
I love
So,
it.
but you can see as we go through the elements that we created, the textures, and then the photos together all sort of creates a complementary palette for the page.
I love it.
Yeah.
Now, I have a question for you about this brand's color, because from a color theory standpoint, red's challenging because emotionally it can mean love, it can mean passion. Passion can be anger or hate. It can be alarm, it can be, like relational. I mean, there's just so many inherent meanings to red, and its usage can be really challenging. It's a very dominant color. So from a creative director standpoint, how do you balance red, or, just what's your opinion or usage of it? Because I know when somebody's like red, it's like, ooh, okay.
Well, red's in their logo is Tyler. It's one of their main brand colors. But you're right, red is a very powerful color. It's a strong color, so it has a lot of weight to it. So you have to look at how you place it. That's why it's at the bottom of the photo. It kind of grounds that first header.
Oh, yeah.
And then we use it throughout in some of the titles and some of the backgrounds. But yeah, it does need to be used sparingly. You don't want to overpower any brand color. You don't want to overpower. You use it too much and it starts to water it down. But in this case, this is a big industrial organization, so being powerful is okay in this context. So yeah, but that's a really a good point to think about. Any color, when you're using it with a brand, you want to make sure that you're not overdoing it. So if the brand has the strength to deal with that,
Yes.
then you have a little more allowances there.
Yeah, agreed. And especially since they are in building, they are bringing strength to the table. I mean, they are in a significant and grounded industry and environment.
Right.
Whereas, with New Life, where you were showing it as calming people down, we don't want a lot of alarm. They already have high emotion if their finances, or if they've got a financial issue that they don't have clear answers on. And so it would not be a good choice in that environment. Okay, you've got a third one. So talk to me about this one. And I think this one is so fun because of how the shapes played out in their physical environment. So talk to us about what you've got up next.
So Colin and Gregory, they're pipes, valves, and fittings, but their logo, their original logo, they were getting confused with either a law firm or a political organization because they had that red, white, and blue on them.
Yikes.
And their font was just thin, and they're an industrial organization.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we did is this kind of what I was talking about earlier in bringing in some images of like flanges and other things that they deal with every day.
Yep.
Recognizable elements that they really know.
Yes.
And then taking those elements down to a simple graphic shape. And so as you go through here, you can kind of see how the flange becomes that simple blue shape. The threads in the pipe become a simple shape. And then as we go through, click through this,
Yep.
kind of builds together, and you can kind of see how the logo starts to build.
I love it.
And then we've got that C
So
and that
clever.
G together with elements, and we'll design different sets to show the client how that comes together. And then when they see the final product, and then how that correlates into their stationery or their, whether it's a work hat or a
Yeah,
uniform.
their clothing, uniforms,
Or
absolutely.
on a vehicle.
Their fleet. Yep.
Yeah, and then it really comes together. And so once we actually started doing that work and then putting it on the actual pieces, you can see how it's just
It's
a great
absolutely
brand.
beautiful.
And it brings them back into that industrial feel, but also very corporate.
Yep.
So, and that's exactly what they need it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
Yeah.
anybody looking at these examples will be able to feel the emotion and the personality
Sure.
of
Yeah.
each one of these clients, and how you couldn't possibly have swapped out the elements just because they're beautiful
Right.
for any of the others. And that's what branding should be. I mean, it should really capture an essence that is unique to that organization, what's
Right.
already there.
Yeah, yeah. And that's coming from a place of truth, even if it's simple truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. By this point, you guys have figured out that both Daisy and I are chief marketing officers. But what you might not realize is there's a whole team of us at the Marketing Blender, and we also have outsourced marketing teams. So if you're curious about how we break revenue plateaus, how we untangle sticky messaging, and how we make sure to drive exciting return on investment and profitable growth, check us out at themarketingblender.com. But it's not just for mid-market companies. We've also figured out how to scale it down for small businesses too.
The Marketing Blender Lab is our program just for small businesses looking to hit their first $1 million in revenue. You still get to work with a real chief marketing officer, and we use the same structures and systems that work to grow big businesses to help you meet and exceed your goals.
So again, if you're interested, check out themarketingblender.com. See you there. So for you, what's some advice that you would give to people when they're trying to consider a rebrand, or maybe when is it time to evolve the brand? Any thoughts on that?
I think that can come at a lot of different times. Like in the example we just talked about, if your audience is confused by your brand,
Yes.
that might be a time to look at what you've got, what you're putting out there. If you just don't feel that jazzed about your brand, if the confidence isn't there, maybe it's the first brand that you started with, and you really didn't have the marketing blender types to come in and
Right.
and make it what it needs to be.
Right.
But I mean, I would take anyone who's thinking about doing that to really investigate it, because what a brand can do for the visual side of your organization is so amazing.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it can affect culture, as you mentioned,
Absolutely.
in recruiting, because it's communicating something important and powerful and true about you. I always call it like it greases the wheels for your marketing tactics, right?
Yeah.
So if it's beautiful, your website works better. It converts interest into inquiry, right?
Right.
If your
Yeah.
advertising is consistent with the reputation that
Sure.
you have,
Yeah.
that familiarity, people just believe you. I mean, the increase in your ability to close the deal, to generate leads, to convert your marketing tactics into something much more effective.
Yeah.
I mean, just as exponential. And the longer you go the more effective a familiar brand becomes in increasing your ROI, which increases profit, and then also the valuation of the company. So
Absolutely.
I think this is a very under leveraged. I mean, the consumer world gets it, but in B2B,
Yeah.
I think too often people are late to the game and they're surprised at what a dramatic financial impact a rebrand can have for a company.
Absolutely. And even if you have a great brand, but you don't see it anywhere else in your materials,
Yeah.
you have to think about brand elements. Brand elements and your brand extensions.
Yeah.
So, if your website or your marketing materials, if they don't have any consistency with your brand, you're not really doing much for your brand.
Yeah.
So building your brand by creating, like the elements that we just looked at before, those, even if it's just for a website, say it's a section for a website, that can be a postcard, that can be a direct mail piece, that can be digital marketing, that can be social media.
Video, animation.
Absolutely. All of those,
Absolutely.
when you start creating those elements and growing that brand into something more than just your logo, it starts to create that confidence and you can use it more and more and more.
Yeah.
Like I said from the start, it builds imprints.
That's right.
You know.
The faster people can understand you and trust you,
Yeah.
the faster they build confidence
Yeah.
to be able to exchange money and believe that your product or service is going to change
And
their.
you're looking more professional that way
Yeah.
too, and those all go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, this was so fun. We're definitely going to have to share some more examples in the future. You guys, thank you so much for joining us. And if you have questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button. See you next time. Onward and upward.